Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and we'll get going with tonight's program. And again, thank you for teaching, and we sure appreciate your knowledge and willingness to educate us.
Well, this one is a fun topic. I had actually prepared this talk to present at the Bee College in March, which unfortunately didn't happen. I don't know that the facts about the Asian giant hornet have changed much in the meantime, but boy, the hornet sure became famous in the last week or 10 days or so. I saw segments on the national network news on the hornet. I heard interviews on the radio. In fact, I heard Scott Shell, who's the cooperative extension entomologist, was interviewed on NPR. There's been a lot of buzz on the internet about it, and even political cartoons. This one was sent to me by Bud Cosby. Thank you, Bud. Pandemic, economy reeling, quarantines, and no sports. How could it get any worse? Well, how about giant hornets? And I noticed this figure has a big resemblance to Dr. Fauci on the COVID-19 task force. Apparently, the reason for all this sudden notoriety for the hornet was an article from the New York Times from the 2nd of this month. Murder hornets in the US, the rush to stop the Asian giant hornet. Now, you can actually read this online. The article itself was fairly factual and not very sensational. The reporter interviewed a beekeeper in Washington State who back in October of 2019 found evidence that hornets had attacked one of his beehives. And they also interviewed another homeowner who actually found a dead hornet on his porch and sent it into the Washington State Department of Agriculture, which allowed it to be identified as the Asian giant hornet. And he also interviewed a fellow named Conrad Berube, who was tasked to destroy the nest of giant hornets, which had been discovered on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And he did succeed in destroying that nest, although he got stung 6 or 7 times in the course of doing it. So he had an exciting story to tell. But all in all, the article was really pretty tame. I think the real genius here was in the headline writer who coined the phrase murder hornets. And that came from a Japanese entomologist who was translating the Japanese name for the hornet. Back around in January, I never saw any reference to murder hornets. It appeared that the name, the Japanese name for the hornet was the yak killer hornet. And I think if they'd used that name, this article might not have gotten quite the buzz that it did. If it said that yak killer hornets were coming to the United States, I don't think people would have gotten so excited. You know, yak killer hornets, oh dear, I hope my yaks are going to be okay. But murder hornets are something completely different, and this really caught the public imagination. And so there's been a lot of interest in the giant Asian hornet, and unfortunately a fair amount of misinformation as well. Back in January, since I'm not an entomologist, in order to learn something more about the hornet, I went on the internet and did some searches, and boy, did I find some very interesting things. This was before this New York Times article was published. And of course, if it's on the internet, it has to be true. So here are some of the internet headlines that were circulating around at the beginning of the year. This hornet will be the last thing you see before you die. Wow. Or giant mutant killer hornets created by exposure to radiation from the Fukushima nuclear plant have killed several people in Nebraska. Now, I think everyone knows from seeing Hollywood movies in the 50s that exposure to radiation, particularly from the H-bomb or A-bomb test sites, causes insects to grow to enormous size. You remember movies with giant spiders and giant ants and giant scorpions. So apparently this notion that these hornets had were mutant hornets created by radiation seemed credible to a number of people. It eventually was traced back to a website called National Report, which says that it is a satiric and humorous website, and basically is full of fake news articles. Around the same time as they reported these giant mutant hornets, they also reported that the IRS was announcing a crackdown on undisclosed income that people derived from leprechauns. And another of their stories said that the Boy Scouts of America had approved a new merit badge on the topic of boobs. So eventually, after this got promoted around on the net somewhat, it got to Snopes.com, which is a fact check site, and they identified the story as false. Thank goodness. Another headline said, terrifying giant Asian hornets kill over 40 people in China and spread to America. Well, that's actually not exactly untrue, although it's a rather sensational headline. There have been deaths in China attributed to attacks by the giant hornets, which are endemic in various parts of Asia. And there is concern that the hornets might spread to America. The story may not have said that so far the only hornets that have ever been found within the 48 contiguous states were 2 dead hornets in Washington state near the Canadian border. But at least that headline wasn't completely off. The Chinese city living in fear of giant killer hornets, that was actually on the Guardian website, and was a report on the city of Ankang in China, where there had been I think 18 deaths attributed to insect stings, and many of those were thought to be from the Asian giant hornets, as well as dozens of stinging incidents that did not result in death. Here's thank you global warming. Giant hornets are killing dozens in China and eating bees across Europe. Well, this is a fairly common misconception on the net and elsewhere. It is the giant hornets that are suggested to be the cause of deaths in China, but the hornets that are coming into Europe and were introduced into Europe back in 2004 and are causing concern in France and Italy and Spain and England are not the giant hornets. They are a different Asian hornet, actually smaller than the European hornets that are already resident in the areas in which the introduced species is in danger of taking over. And this doesn't appear to have anything to do with global warming. The hornets, the Asian hornet, not the giant hornet, were introduced into France in a shipment of pottery that came from China. So global warming is not to blame in this particular case. The Birmingham Mail had a similar problem. They thought gigantic murderous Asian hornets are set to invade the UK as Britain faces the hottest spring on record. Well, it's not the giant Asian hornets. It's the smaller yellow-legged Asian hornets. And there is concern they have been sighted in the United Kingdom more than a dozen times. It doesn't seem to have much to do with it being the hottest spring on record. They have came over from France. They were introduced in 2004, and so this is about 12 years later that they were first found in Britain. And then the Daily Star, which is a British tabloid, had the headline "Terror as Britain's first pumpkin-sized nest sparks giant killer Asian hornet invasion." And they actually had a picture to go along with that. Here is a picture of the giant Asian hornet and the pumpkin-sized nest. And that is indeed a giant Asian hornet. And it is a large nest. The problem with this is that the papery nests in trees are much more typical of the small yellow-legged hornet. The giant Asian hornet is a ground dweller and tends to nest in existing cavities made by rodents or cavities associated with tree roots. So that is probably not the nest of the giant hornet. And indeed, I think there are a couple of little hornets on here and they're not very big. So it looks like this photograph was photoshopped. with a picture of someone holding the giant hornet superimposed on the nest of the smaller hornet. Here's a site that offers travel advice and has articles of interest to people who may be traveling in America or going to Europe. Massive killer hornets on deadly rampage heading to America. And this said that Asian giant hornets have appeared in, and then they list 20 different states, as well as showing a picture of a hornet. Oh, excuse me. Here we are. Picture of a hornet over here and evidence of hornet stings. Well, this is not quite accurate. They listed 20 states in which the Asian giant hornets were reported to have appeared. They actually have not been confirmed in any of those states. They didn't list Washington State, which is the only place that hornets have been found. The reason for all of these reports of hornets is that in America, there are some fairly large hornets. And after all the hype about the giant Asian hornet, many people who saw a large bug thought that they were seeing giant Asian hornets. What they were seeing was the normal European hornet, which is resident in a good part of the eastern United States, or another insect known as the eastern cicada killer, which is also a very large wasp. This picture had over 100,000 views. It had the caption, "One person stung by the Asian giant hornet described it like a hot nail being driven into my leg. In Japan, this guy kills around 40 people a year. Would you hold him?" And clearly the person who took the selfie is risking having a hot nail driven into his hand by holding onto this giant hornet. Now, here's a picture of a giant hornet, and it's a large insect, but it's not quite as large as the insect in this picture, which is larger than this fellow's hand. It looks like it's 6 to 8 inches and the size of maybe a robin or another bird. Well, as it turns out, what he is holding is not in danger of stinging him because, in fact, it's a 3D printed model. This is a movable painted model. There is a Japanese artist named Mushuguchi, and he uses high-resolution digital imaging of insects and then takes those images and uses a 3D printer to create these models, which are quite realistic and which are then painted. So whoever circulated this picture on the internet was not at risk of being stung. It did manage to make it onto the fan pages of a couple of Hollywood celebrities, so it actually got tens of thousands of views. Now, the original New York Times article was on May 2nd, and so about a week later, we have this: bug experts dismiss worry about the murder hornets as hype. And several bug experts were quoted in this. These are typically university or agriculture department entomologists. Chris Looney is with the Washington State Department of Agriculture, and he said, "These are not murder hornets, they're just hornets. The number of people who are stung and have to seek medical attention is incredibly small." And at the University of Illinois, people are afraid of the wrong thing. The scariest insects out there are mosquitoes, and people don't think twice about them. If anyone is a murder insect, it would be a mosquito. And she is referring to the fact that mosquitoes are responsible for millions of deaths each year by spreading malaria, dengue fever, and other bloodborne illnesses. And at the University of Delaware, this is 99% media hype. And frankly, I'm getting tired of it. Murder hornet, please. Now, I thought since seeing is believing, even though some of the pictures are not perfectly accurate, that I'd try to show a couple of YouTube videos here. And let me see if this is going to work. So I'm going to put the PowerPoint away for a moment. And let's see. Okay, you want to get in here. Okay, let's see. I need to get behind there. Okay, let's try this. Can everyone see that on the screen? Catherine, are you able to see this YouTube?
No, David, what you need to do is stop sharing the PowerPoint and then pull up the YouTube and share the
Okay,
the YouTube
all
if you
right,
can do
let's
that.
see here.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, screen sharing is paused, so I want to stop the share. All right. And now we'll go to YouTube. And now let's see if I can get back the...
Yeah, you're gonna need to share the screen again with the YouTube.
Okay, and let's see, I can see the YouTube, but I can't see the screen share. Let's see down here. So have I lost... Okay, what are you seeing right now?
Just all the attendance, everyone who's participating in this, and so we're not
Okay,
seeing a
you're not
YouTube.
seeing my screen.
No.
Okay, I think maybe... Sorry, I think maybe I've lost you. I'm going to relaunch the Zoom again.
Okay, because you're still here with us, and you should be able to just share your screen.
Okay. I don't, oh, there's, okay, here's Zoom, but I don't see the screen share appearing on my screen.
Should be down on your toolbar.
Okay. All right, are you able to?
Now, if you take your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, a toolbar should pop up.
All right, I had to drag this over into Zoom.
Because you're still on Zoom, David.
Okay. So. All right, talk among yourselves.
Yeah.
And okay, I don't need that. Okay, so share screen.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I now pull? I need to pull a YouTube video onto this screen.
If you've got the YouTube video open,
Yeah.
and it's in the background, theoretically, you should be able to, click
Drag
share
it.
screen and find it and pull it up.
Okay.
Theoretically.
Theoretically. Are you able to see my application screen here?
Nope.
Okay, and now I hit share screen. Is that working?
Nope. Maybe we need to get you just, oh, there you go.
So what do you see now?
Okay, so now we can see a screen with a YouTube screen.
Ah, okay. All right, so we're getting close.
Yep.
Let's all right, and now if we can find the right one here.
I see the National Geographic has named them the Hornets from Hell.
Right, yes, there's quite a lot of YouTube interest in the giant hornet. The one that I'm looking for, and I had it a little while ago, but it's not appearing right here. Well, let's try this. This is a little shortened version. This was a CNN news reel, and there are a couple of interesting features on it. By the way, some of the images are somewhat disturbing because they show sting victims and some of the sting damage. You'll notice also that as they narrate this story, they show giant hornets nest on the ground, they show hornets on a tree, and then toward the end of the set of images, they show a couple of the typical hornet globular papery nests. Those are not typical of giant hornets, and if you look very carefully as they flicker across the screen, I think you'll see that the hornets in those nests are not very large at all. It looks like they have some pictures of the Asian hornet mixed in with the story about the giant Asian hornet. But let's see if we can make this work.
So not getting any sound.
Uh-oh, okay. All right, I may have to give up on the, okay, let's close
That
that
looks like
out.
some pretty extreme hornet eradication.
Yeah, let's give up on that, and those who want to can seek these out on their own. Here are the titles. Are you able to see my PowerPoint now?
Yeah.
Yep, you need to, yeah, make it bigger. There you go. Make it, okay.
So if you're interested, go ahead and take a look at these YouTube videos. One is the news report on some of the stinging deaths in China. Another one shows 30 hornets basically decimating a beehive. And then another one shows the defense that the Japanese honeybees, that is the Apis ceranae, eastern honeybees, have a way of being able to defend themselves against the large hornets. They cannot sting the hornet because the carapace of the giant hornet is so thick that the honeybees really can't do any damage, but they can surround the hornet and generate heat and basically kill the hornet by cooking it. And I have some still images of that, but if you'd like to see this this video, it shows that over several minutes shows the hornets defending themselves. So we'll go on from there. This is the giant Asian hornet, and it's large. It's 2 to maybe 2 1/4 inches in length. It's the largest hornet in the world. There is a variety, a subvariety, which is the Japanese giant hornet. This is the same genus and species, but it is a different subspecies or variety, so its relation to the giant Asian hornet is the same as that of the Italian honeybee to the Caucasian or Carniolan honeybee. That is, they are the same species, but because the hornets in Japan have been geographically isolated for some time, they've evolved a little different coloring, perhaps a little different temperament, but they are in fact the same genus and species as the hornet that's found in China and Korea and elsewhere. Here is a picture of the giant Asian hornet, that's letter A here, and 2 wasps that are found in America. This is the European hornet, or brown hornet, and you can see that it's pretty good sized as well. And you might understand why people think that they have seen a giant Asian hornet along the East Coast or in the Midwest. And letter C over here, this is the eastern cicada killer, which is another species of wasp, but it too is pretty good sized. So it's very likely people who report seeing giant Asian hornets all over the country are probably seeing these more native hornets. So giant Asian hornet is Vespa. Vespa is the genus, a genus of wasps. Mandarinia, mandarin refers to Asia. And then there is the Japanese subspecies. This is found particularly in eastern Southeast Asia, so northern India, eastern Russia, Japan, Korea, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand. It is occasionally seen at elevations, but really most sightings are at less than 2,000 feet. It favors forested areas in the foothills more than level plains or very high elevations on the mountaintops. It prefers forested habitat, but can be found in green spaces in more urban environments. And like honeybees, the hornets seek both sugar and protein. The sugar they get from sap, and there are some pictures of hornets that have found a place where oak sap has dripped from the tree and fermented, and they will defend that mother lode of fermented sap against hornets from other nests. They also collect sap from evergreens and fruit trees, and occasionally even collect flower nectars, as do honeybees. For protein, though, they are predators of other insects, and that would include beetles and caterpillars, spiders, other wasps, including yellowjackets and paper wasps, as well as honeybees. And it's this predation on honeybees that is causing the concern in the Pacific Northwest if this species is in fact introduced or becomes established there. The life cycle of the giant Asian hornet is similar to other bees that we have in America, including the bumblebees. That is, when they overwinter, the entire colony does not survive the winter. Essentially, the solitary queen, overwinters either in a burrow in the ground or in a hollow cavity under bark, and therefore the queen has the task in the spring of building a nest and populating it. No other hornets, no worker hornets will survive the winter. So in the spring, the queen emerges from the burrow, looks for a source of sugary food, her ovaries develop, and she will look for a nesting spot, which typically is in an existing burrow, a rodent burrow, or a cavity under a tree root, rarely above ground in a tree cavity. And the queen builds a papery nest called the nesting envelope inside that cavity, and forages for food, lays eggs, and cares for her young, doing all the things that nurse bees and forager bees would do in a honeybee hive are all the responsibility of the hornet queen in the spring. But as the worker population in the nest increases, the workers can begin to take over some of those responsibility, taking care of the eggs and the larvae. Even in the summertime, the queen will still go out of the nest to forage, unlike a honeybee queen. When in the late summer and fall, there are more than 40 workers in the nest, at that point, the queen becomes nest bound, and the workers are the ones who do the foraging and take care of the eggs and the larvae. In the fall, when there are enough workers to take care of the nest, the queen will begin to lay eggs that will develop into males and also additional queens. The males will leave the nest, and in Japan, that's in October. The queens come out about a month later, and the new queens need to mate prior to the onset of winter because all the other hornets, the workers and the drones, will die before winter. So the queens forage in the spring and summer, and the workers forage in the summer and early fall. But the really destructive attacks on the honeybee colonies occur for a fairly limited period of time in the fall when that colony is in the reproductive phase. So there is a need for protein to support the brood for the males and for the queens, when they need to be fed, this is the time when the hornets become more serious predators, particularly of these honeybee colonies. And during that reproductive phase, the queen may produce more than 200 males and more than 200 queens, but not all of the males and queens are going to be fed, and not all the queens are going to mate successfully. So there is a much smaller number of fertile queens who will be able to survive the winter into the following spring and start the cycle over again. Now, the eastern honeybees, Apis ceranae, have figured out a way to defend themselves against the hornets. The hornets are 5 or 6 times larger than the bees themselves, and the bees have relatively little defense in a head-to-head contest against the hornets. But there is a behavior which is present in both Apis ceranae and in Apis mellifera. This is the way that the honeybees get rid of a queen that they no longer want. So if they are superseding a queen, but the old queen is still in the hive, the bees will surround the queen and generate heat, and they will kill the old queen so that she can be replaced. Now, Apis ceranae, the eastern honeybees, have figured out how to use this behavior to kill the giant Asian hornets. The western honeybee has not, and this has actually made it difficult to introduce Apis mellifera as a honey-producing bee into Japan and other Asian countries. They lack this defensive behavior, even though they are often, the western honeybee is a more productive honeybee, and there's certainly a desire to see if they can be brought in for honey production. But they just don't have the necessary behavior. So here, the beekeeper has attached a live hornet and secured it with a little piece of wire here. And that way he can move this hornet over towards the beehive of the eastern honeybee, the Apis ceranae hive. And here, the honeybees cluster around the hornet, and they generate heat. And they can produce enough heat to raise the temperature inside that ball of bees to about 47 degrees centigrade. And that is sufficient to kill the hornet, and it is still a little bit lower. There's not a lot of leeway, but it's a little bit lower than the temperature that actually kills the bees. It takes about 20 minutes of heat generation here, so this is not a speedy process. But in the end, the hornet that has been surrounded will die, and the bees can depart. And so there is a potential defense against these hornets for the eastern honeybees. There also is a natural predator of the hornet, and this is somewhat similar to the varroa mite in the western honeybee. This is an insect in the order Strepsiptera, twisted wing parasites. The males look like flies, and they are able to move from one host hornet to the other, but the females have the appearance of a larva. They have no eyes, antenna, no wings or legs, and they live their entire life cycle within the host insect. And here is a picture of the female, which is very larva-like. It does not resemble a fly, which is just peeking out between the carapace layers of the hornet's body. So this possibly might offer a biological control on the hornet, but that's speculative at this point. Deaths attributed to the giant Asian hornet. It's not always clear if there has been a death from stinging insects, which insects are responsible. It is said that dozens of people in China and Japan are killed each year by insect stings, and some of those are going to be due to giant Asian hornets. The number of stings yearly is fairly large, 1,500. And in a fairly brief period of 3 to 4 months in 2013, there was a rash of stinging deaths in Shaanxi province, which were attributed to giant Asian hornets. 42 deaths, 206 hospitalizations, 1,675 people attacked. Some of the deaths were due to massive envenomation with multiple stings, but some are due to anaphylactic allergic reactions to the venom, which can happen with a single sting. And the venom causes a local tissue death. It causes a breakdown of red blood cells, and those clog up the kidneys. So people who suffer stings can have renal failure as a cause of death as well. In Japan, one report said several dozen deaths per year could be attributed to the giant Asian hornet. Another report said that the actual number of deaths due to all kinds of insect stings was 13 in 2017 and 13 in 2018. There are 130 million people in Japan, so that is 1 out of 10 million. But it is said that the giant Asian hornet is the deadliest wild animal that is found on the islands. There's been a lot of talk about how toxic the venom is, but in fact, the venom of the giant Asian hornet is not even as toxic as that of our own yellowjackets here in Wyoming. But because they're larger, they inject more venom with each sting. They say that if one is stung more than 10 times, you should seek medical care and probably emergency care if you have more than 30 stings. So these insects do pose some danger to people, typically who stumble onto the area where their underground nests are. They do not forage very far, only about 700 meters from their nest, unlike honeybees who go out for as many as 2 miles. And therefore, the hornets are not around very far from the nest, but the nests are often in forested areas. They're on the ground, and they may be hard to see. People may stumble onto them before they're really aware that the hornets are there. So what's the story about the hornet in North America? Well, in August of last year, 3 adult specimens were found on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And in the same month, a large hornet was reported to have been seen near his house by a beekeeper in Bellingham, Washington, up near the Canadian border. In September, Conrad Berube was tasked to go and find the nest and destroy it, which he did. And he subsequently wrote an article for the American Bee Journal in February of 2020 telling about his adventure in finding the nest, which might be worth a look. In October, a single specimen was photographed, but the insect was not collected, and that was in a different location, also in British Columbia. And also in October, a beekeeper in northern Bellingham in Washington reported that he had evidence that hornets had attacked his beehive. And he took pictures of the dead bees that had been severed by the hornet's mandibles. So that was presumptive evidence that the hornets were in the area. It wasn't until December that a homeowner found a dead hornet on his porch and collected it, sent it into the agriculture department, and it was confirmed to be a giant Asian hornet. Another homeowner reported seeing a large hornet near his hummingbird feeder, and eventually a second specimen was obtained by another beekeeper in the same area. Now, Bellingham is about 27 kilometers away from Blaine, so that raised some concern that the hornets might be moving and spreading in that area. It is reported that a genetic analysis showed that the hornets that were found in Washington state were not genetically related to the nest that had been destroyed on Vancouver Island. That apparently hasn't been published or peer-reviewed, but the report is there that these are 2 different introductions from a different genetic pool. So this caused an alert by the Washington State Department of Agriculture. In January and February, there were notices in the Washington State Beekeepers Association newsletter warning beekeepers to be on the lookout. The Department of Agriculture is setting out traps over a grid across the area. So far this year, no additional giant hornets, live or dead, have been found either in the US or in Canada. So although this did raise a lot of concern, as it's not clear that any of these hornets might have survived the winter. Can the giant hornet survive in our climate? Well, in Asia, if we look at the plant hardiness zones, the range of the giant hornet is from 3 to 13. And that would suggest that the hornet possibly could survive in all 48 contiguous states. But sightings in Asia in zones 3 and 4 and 5 are rare. It is probably unfavorable. The temperature is unfavorable. And therefore, the chances that the hornets, even if they were successful in spreading along the forested regions on the West Coast, it probably would be difficult for them to get over the Sierra Nevada, to get over the Rockies, and they might find that certainly in the northern part of the US, our climate is fundamentally unfavorable to their survival. And it's also mentioned that even when the giant hornets are found in Asia, they're present in relatively sparse numbers. So although it's quite dramatic, the harm that a hive of hornets can do to a beehive, we really have a lot of other things to worry about, and that includes varroa and viruses and pesticides and queen fertility and drone fertility. All of those are more likely to have impact on American beekeeping than the hornets, even if they were to establish themselves up in the Pacific Northwest. Let's go to Europe because there, as I mentioned, there was a lot of confusion about the hornet problems that were occurring in Europe with Asian hornets and the giant Asian hornet sightings in the US. The hornet that has been causing grief in Europe is actually a different species. It's still in the genus Vespa, the wasps, but this is Vespa velutina, and it's called the yellow-legged hornet, and you can see why from this picture. This hornet is actually smaller than the native European hornets, but the concern is that it may be aggressive and that it may establish itself in Europe and cause alterations in the ecology. It could destroy native insect populations. It could harm beekeeping. It could displace the native hornets. The life cycle of the Asian hornet, Vespa velutina, is very similar. The solitary queens overwinter underground or under bark or in straw. They emerge in the spring. They look for sugary energy sources. They begin to build the nest, and this nest is that more commonly known papery ball or globular nest suspended off the ground. And as the number of workers increase, the queen becomes more nest bound. The workers will forage and they will help with brood rearing, and these nests can become quite large. That pumpkin-sized nest is, certainly, it may not be typical, but it's certainly possible. The wasps are actually considered to be useful in an agricultural sense because they will prey on beetles and caterpillars and soft-bodied insects, which are harmful to agriculture and to gardening. But in addition, they will also prey on honeybees. Now, the yellow-legged hornet, the Asian hornet, does not have the behavior of attacking a hive, killing all the bees in the hive and then taking over the hive in order to harvest the larvae and pupa, which is what the giant Asian hornets can do. These smaller hornets will hover around the beehive and they will try to capture foraging honeybees as they return. They basically decapitate the honeybee with their mandibles and carry the thorax and abdomen back to their nest as a protein source for their young. So they can be seen hovering around the beehives, but they won't actually invade into the hives the way the giant Asian hornets will. They're also a little more prolific. A single hornet colony can produce up to 6,000 individuals. And during autumn, the queen can make up to 350 queens as well as males. And again, only a small number of those queens are likely to survive to the following year. Maybe we've been worried about the wrong hornet. This quotation was from a European entomologist and said that Vespa velutina has not been intercepted in North America, but is believed to have high invasion potential. So this hornet might be a problem for us even more than the giant hornet. The yellow-legged hornet was identified in France in 2004, and it was thought that it had come in with a shipment of pottery or bonsai from China. The efforts to contain it have not been very successful, and over the last 16 years, it has gradually spread so that it is seen in multiple counties or departments in France, identified in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, Majorca, and in 2016, first sightings were made in the United Kingdom. Actually, one of the first sightings was on the Isle of Jersey, and when it was reported that the Asian hornets were found in Jersey, I'm sure some readers thought that that was New Jersey. So if they got that hornet in Jersey, how long do you think it'll be before it comes to New York? But no, that was the Isle of Jersey. And since then, there have been something over a dozen sightings of the hornet in various parts of the United Kingdom. It costs quite a bit of money to try to eradicate these hornets, and those eradication efforts have not been particularly successful. But in about 9 years, it looked like France had spent $24 million on mitigation efforts. Excuse me, and that is only projected to increase over time. As of today, the effort put into nest removal is not sufficient to prevent the spread of the species. So this is an introduced species that has the potential to cause a good deal of difficulty. That led to the UK putting out a wanted poster on the yellow-legged hornet. Have you seen this insect? And they pointed out the yellow legs, the dark body, and the wasp waist. And also the markings on the abdomen for the Asian hornet has just one band of yellow across the fourth segment as compared to the native European hornet. Some pictures of the large papery nests. And beekeepers in the UK have been enlisted to do monitoring traps to try to identify the presence of the Asian hornet. This is made from a soda pop bottle with the top cut off and inverted to make a funnel trap. But the goal of these traps was not to kill the insects that were captured. They were actually afraid that if all the beekeepers started trapping hornets and other flying insects, they were going to depopulate the native hornet population and make an open field for the Asian hornet to move in. So the goal here was to actually trap these insects alive and inspect them, and only if it appeared that there were Asian hornets in the trap would the bottle be put in the freezer and then the specimen sent off to the Department of Agriculture. Otherwise, they advocated releasing any native hornets that might have gotten into the trap. So this is a catch them alive trap, not your typical water-based trap that kills the insects that get trapped through the funnel. And they put out instructions on how to make these and have a lot of beekeepers in the UK putting these traps out in order to try and monitor for the presence of the Asian hornet, which is more likely to be attracted around the beehives as a food source than random trapping elsewhere in the forest. So that's the bee that is, or the hornet that's causing trouble for beekeepers in Europe. It's not the giant Asian hornet. Those two are very frequently confused. Even Animal Planet, which did a segment on this, showed pictures of the giant hornet while talking about the introduction of the Asian hornet into Europe. Here's the hornet, which is present in a good part of the eastern US, but I don't believe has managed to make a home in Wyoming. This is called the brown hornet or the European hornet. It actually was introduced back in the 1800s in order to control caterpillars in the forest. And it has since taken to our environment and is distributed pretty much throughout the eastern United States. And it is a large hornet, and some people who have seen it have thought they were seeing a giant Asian hornet. Here's the other eastern cicada killer, and that's also a pretty good-sized wasp. and again might be thought of as being the giant Asian hornet. I think it's probably unlikely any of us are ever going to see one of these. It's certainly in Wyoming. But there is a wasp in Wyoming that we might encounter and that could cause some problems for beehives, and that's the western yellowjacket. This is Vespula is the genus rather than Vespa, but this is still a wasp. And along with the bald-faced hornet, these are two common wasps that are found here in Wyoming. This is a ground-dwelling wasp, so the nest is often a large hole in the ground, looks like a very large anthill. And yellowjackets will try to gain entrance into beehives. They are interested in the honey, but they're also interested in the larva and the pupa. And while they won't destroy a hive or take it over, they can deplete the brood and somewhat weaken a hive. So there are a number of strategies for controlling yellowjackets. Typically, you won't see these in spring or early summer in any great numbers. But come the end of summer and the beginning of fall, if you're having picnics and you've got either sweet lemonade or burgers, you're likely to attract yellowjackets to the sweet and to the fatty meat source there. Interestingly enough, it is argued that yellowjackets will attack beehives because they sense that the hives are unhealthy, that they are weak, and that the yellowjackets are not so much predators of bees as they are an indicator species showing that there is some form of illness in the hives. So one strategy for controlling yellowjackets is simply to maintain healthy beehives. And if you do see that you're having a lot of yellowjacket activity around your hive, you may want to look for a reason for that and make a careful search for varroa mites, for evidence of viral diseases, for foul brood or other brood diseases, because it may be that the yellowjackets are simply picking on the weakest of the hives. One lady advocates swatting yellowjackets. If she's out working her hives, if she's got her bee gloves on, she sees the yellowjackets on the landing board, she just squishes them. She says she hasn't been stung yet. I don't know how many yellowjackets you can remove with that strategy, but that's certainly one possibility. Another one is to fill a squirt gun with soapy water and to have a very fine stream of soapy water that you can direct at the yellowjackets and hopefully not at your own honeybees, and squirt them when you see them when you're out by the hive. An interesting idea, and I don't know whether it works or not, was to make a decoy hornet nest. Now, yellowjackets are preyed upon by other hornets, and in Wyoming, that's the bald-faced hornet, and the bald-faced hornet makes a typical shaped hornet's nest. So this one beekeeper covered a balloon with paper mache and made a decoy hornet nest, which she hung up prominently where she hoped it would scare away the yellowjackets. I'm not sure if it worked, but they had some fun with the project. You can try to poison the yellowjackets with particularly meat. You probably don't want to poison a sugary solution because the honeybees will be attracted to it. But honeybees are less likely to be attracted to bacon or fish or chicken. And you can put baking soda in there or dope it with a liquid flea treatment and potentially poison the yellowjackets. There are also pheromone traps. There are a couple of different chemical compounds which mimic yellowjacket pheromones. These are said not to attract honeybees. If you put them out in the spring, you may trap the queens during the time that they are foraging in the early stages of nest building, and any queen that you manage to trap in April or May will mean quite a few fewer yellowjackets come summer and fall. You can also hang out the pheromone traps in the summer and fall to try and catch the foraging workers. Water traps can be baited with fish. It is said that banana peel has a chemical that's attractive to yellowjackets. I've found that vinegar, maybe a half a cup in a quart of water in a standard water-based bottle trap, attracts occasional honeybees, but a good deal more yellow jackets than bees attracted to vinegar. You can also beeline the yellow jackets, follow them back and see if you can find where their nests are. Yellow jackets don't forage over a very large area. And so if you can find and destroy the nest, you'll solve the problem at its root. If you destroy all the yellow jackets in your area, you will find an increase in the number of caterpillars and soft-bodied insects damaging your garden. So many people feel that wasps are a good biological control and are helpful in your gardening efforts. So you may not want to destroy them all unless you really have evidence that they are doing some harm to your bees. And finally, you can put an anti-robbing screen, which is works for both other honeybees that are trying to rob your hive and for wasps that are trying to get in. Here's a picture of the decoy hornet nest, which was made by putting paper mache over a balloon. And again, I have no idea whether that worked or not. Here is a anti-robbing screen. This is just a little frame of wood with a window screen tacked to it. And up at the front top here is the very narrow opening, which serves as the entrance and exit for the honeybees. Now, you would think that the yellow jackets would soon figure out that they could get into the nest through this thin slit up here, but in fact, they try to gain entrance by essentially attacking and swooping down and run into the screen, and it seems to take them quite a bit of time to figure out that there is a different way to get into the hive. Other designs of this have a small hole on the side that the bees use to get in and out, and the screen, which basically distracts the either other bees or wasps that are trying to gain entrance. And some people have these on year-round, actually make a decent mouse guard because they also restrict the entrance for mice in winter. This particular one was put out by the Cokesville beekeepers, and they have instructions online. Here are some resources if you're interested. When excitement happened back in January, the USDA put out a new pest response guidelines, a 69-page pamphlet specifically on the Giant Asian Hornet. Has information about the life cycle of the hornet, various control measures, and probably the most authoritative information source that I was able to find. The Washington Department of Agriculture has a Facebook page, which they update periodically with reports on any additional finds of Giant Asian Hornets in Washington. If you're interested in the robber screen, here's a reference from the Cokesville beekeepers. The article by Conrad Berube was in the February 2020 American Bee Journal, and giant alien insect invasion averted. He wrote about his going out to try and find this nest on Vancouver Island. It's a fun article to read. And then the Washington State Beekeepers Association puts out an online newsletter every month, and they periodically will print updates about the Giant Asian Hornet. They also had an article, how to do it article for building a robbing screen from the Washington State University apiary manager. Their design is a little bit different than the Cokesville group, but you can also look this up online as directions for the anti-robbing screens used by Washington State. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. Does anybody have any questions?
David, I'm not seeing any questions coming in right this minute, but if anyone has questions about trying to deal with yellow jackets or wasp or anything with their hive, go ahead. You can unmute or you can type into the chat group. But David, I want to thank you for a very educational and enlightening program on the giant Asian hornet. And I think the media has once again overblown the issue. And we have other things that we need to worry about with our bees and have other concerns. So I really appreciate your myth busting with this program. And again, if anyone has a question about this, go ahead and unmute and ask, or you can write it into the chat group. David, do you have any other comments about wasps and trying to deal with them?
Well, I think that for the most part, they are not a major hazard for bees. I've seen yellowjackets hovering around hives, particularly getting into the fall. I have put out traps from time to time, and I've certainly caught some yellowjackets, but I've never caught them in the numbers that made me think that they were really doing a lot of harm to my hives. And again, if you were able to capture every wasp in the neighborhood, you would probably pay a price for that in terms of more caterpillar damage to your plants, perhaps more spiders, more flies. These wasps are basically the lions and wolves of the insect world, but they can be helpful in terms of getting rid of other harmful insects if you can tolerate what damage they could do to the hives. The giant Asian hornet is a different matter. They can destroy a hive, and those YouTube videos are rather frightening because they show a small number of hornets, about 3 dozen hornets, can completely decimate a beehive in about 3 hours or so. And they will actually move into that hive and defend it while they are harvesting the larvae and the pupa to take back to their own nest. They'll defend the hive that they have captured from other hornets from other nests. In those areas in which the Asian hornets are prevalent, they are a real danger to beehives containing Western honeybees. Asian beekeepers will screen their hives to prevent the hornets from being able to get into the hive, but it doesn't prevent them from capturing and killing the foragers as they fly back and forth. So the giant Asian hornet is a potential risk to beekeeping, but so far in their numbers and in the range in which they have been found, it's a potential threat and probably not deserving of all of the excitement and anxiety that this New York Times article seems to have triggered.
Yes, it has triggered quite a wave there. David, I do have a question for you from Alyssa. I've heard yellowjackets and paper wasps decapitate honeybees as well. Is this true? So do we need to worry about yellowjackets and paper wasps?
Well, I don't believe that paper wasps are considered to be a risk to honeybees particularly. And yellowjackets, in terms of their size, while they might try to attack a honeybee, they don't have the mandibles that the giant Asian hornet has, which makes it possible for them to decapitate bees. Now, other hornets, like the bald-faced hornet and the European hornet, may do that hawking, where they hover around watching for foragers coming and going from the hive and capturing individual honeybees. The yellowjackets I've seen have not been attacking my bees so much as trying to get entrance into the hive, and I think they're after the honey and or the protein that they can find there, as opposed to appearing to attack the honeybees themselves.
Okay, we appreciate your answer and help on that. And again, just some really great information, and getting a lot of thank yous, and seems like everyone's pretty appreciative of the, again, myth busting and kind of dispelling some of the fear mongering that's been created by the media. And so that's just appreciated all the way around, David. So thank you for that. And if there isn't any more questions, I think we'll adjourn the meeting. And I do have, at this moment, I have Albert Chubak, who's got Echo Beehives, going to be my speaker for the 19th, Tuesday the 19th. And his topics will be on the things I didn't know I needed to know, which has always been a real popular program at the Wyoming Bee College. And he and I joke about how many slides he was able to get through before he was avalanched with questions. So at this point, I do have Albert Chubak coming on for next week. And if there's no other questions, then I will say goodbye for this evening and hope everyone stays well and healthy and you guys have fun with your bees and have a successful year. So with that,
Okay, good night, everybody.
good night. Have a good evening. Thank you, David.